Welcome to Hub Hits. I'm Harrison Lowman, managing editor of The Hub. Today I'm joined by Kaveh Shahrooz. He is a lawyer and human rights activist, a former senior policy advisor on human rights at Global Affairs Canada, and a senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Really good to be with you. Thank you.
Strange times. I want to get more of a sense of how you're viewing the attacks between Israel and Iran as the conflict now enters people the fourth day. Kaveh, as well, is a proud Iranian Canadian, so he can provide even more insights on this topic. I want to start off, though, basically asking, is this no longer a conflict? Is this a war now, Kaveh?
I mean, I think this is about as close to a war as you can get. The countries are exchanging missiles with sort of seeming reckless abandon. They're killing civilians and military personnel and attacking each other's, sensitive military installations. I think we're in a war situation now. Yeah.
You are Iranian Canadian. Do you have family currently over there in the region, in Iran?
I do, with the exception of my immediate family and a couple of other people. Virtually my entire extended family still lives in Iran, for the most part in Tehran.
And from the communication you get from them, how have they been processing the last 4 days?
They are incredibly stressed out and afraid for understandable reasons. Just earlier today, the IDF issued a statement saying if you're in, the third district of Tehran, abandon, leave because we're gonna hit some targets there. And I talked to family members who live in that area, and they said, we don't know where to go. First of all, fuel is incredibly hard to get, so our cars are often low on fuel. The roads are packed, and we don't have anywhere else to go. So, they're very, very nervous. But the sentiment that I've heard a couple times, and I hope it stays this way. I mean, this is the kind of thing that changes hour by hour. The sentiment I've heard is that so far the bombings seem to be the Israeli bombings on Iran, not the other way around. They seem to be very, very targeted. They seem not to hit indiscriminately or hurt too many civilians. And a lot of the anger that I've heard from family and friends back in Iran has been actually directed at the regime, not at the Israelis that are doing the bombing. Again, like I said, I mean, these are very early days, and a couple of bombs falling in bad places would entirely change that calculus. But at the moment, that's the sentiment I'm hearing.
Because I'm trying to get a sense of those allegiances, and I know we're all the way over here in Canada, but where that anger is being directed, like, if you're getting bombed, are you shaking your fist at a government that is authoritarian and has been using your taxpayer dollars to create a nuclear weapons program? Or are you shaking your fist at Israel, the military that's dropped those bombs? How are Iranians sort of sorting through those emotions as far as you can see?
Yeah, I mean, look, there are 80 million people in Iran and a lot of different views. But the what I can glean from speaking to family and friends and also what I see on social media, and I try to follow a lot of different accounts, not necessarily people that think like me, but a lot of different views. The impression that I get is that most of the anger is directed at Iran's regime for a few different reasons. One, just the sheer stupidity of this nuclear program, nuclear weapons program, that so much of the country's wealth has been devoted to this. So much energy has been spent on this. The country's been under sanctions for so many years just to develop nuclear weapons, and people are just wondering why this is worth it. Secondly, they're angry because this is a war that, I mean, if you really think about it, is being fought over Israelis and Palestinians. I mean, for 40 years, the Iranian regime has made the Palestinian issue the key issue, but like that, it's not a national concern. I mean, the average Iranian like I mean they may have certain sympathies for the Palestinians or whatever, but they don't want their lives to be dictated by Palestinian policy. So they're incredibly angry that this war has now broken out. Bombs are falling over their heads because of what is happening in a country far away with people that are not even they're not even Iranians. And then finally, the anger that I'm sensing is just at how, despite all the tough talk from Iran's regime, how incompetent and inept it has been. There are no sort of mass shelters for people to go to. The communication about where people can go to be safe has been unbelievably poor. There aren't even, air raid sirens to alert people that Israeli planes are overhead and they're about to bomb. So just the sheer incompetence and the inability of this regime that has spent so much on its military to just offer some basic defense of its people, has been a source of real frustration and anger.
Do you have a sense? I know it's hard to tell these things, but from where you stand, how much munitions that regime has in terms of sustaining this conflict, like what they have in supply?
Yeah, on that, I have to kind of defer to other experts. I'm not sort of a military person, but the impression that I get is what you're seeing Iran do is really kind of the best that they can do. The bombs that they've lobbed at Israel, some of which are making it through and past the Iron Dome. But it's not like Iran is holding back its more fierce weaponry. I think
Mm.
this is about it, and at some point they will run out.
What have you made of the Canadian response so far, both by Mr. Carney and members of his government?
It has been, initially there was a statement I think that came from Minister Anand, that was a little puzzling. It just immediately called for a ceasefire. But I think a ceasefire, obviously you want to limit violence, but a ceasefire has to be on reasonable terms. And she didn't really talk about that. Prime Minister Carney's message I thought was a little bit better. It recognized really why the Israelis are fighting and sort of the evil of Iran's regime. But by and large, I mean, I think what I would like to see Canada do is adopt a policy which I think Israel is moving towards, and hopefully the rest of the West will move towards, which is that this regime cannot stay. This regime needs to change. And then the other thing that I'd want to see the Canadian government do is be very alert to the fact that Iranian officials will probably very soon start making their way to Canada, and for us to be vigilant about that.
Mm-hmm. Definitely important. Just to add some more meat to the bone, Anand tweeting a few days ago, further action risks triggering a broader regional conflict with devastating consequences. And then this phrase, which there was a lot of flack around, de-escalation must be a priority. Prime Minister Carney coming out later, reaffirming Israel's right to defend itself, and calling on all parties to exercise maximum restraint and move towards a diplomatic resolution. You mentioned regime change. Mr. Netanyahu has opened the door to said regime change. Do you think that's actually a possibility here when it comes to Iran?
I think it's one of the possible scenarios that may play out. It would be regime change. My feeling is that post October 7th, the Israeli government and its security apparatus has realized that it cannot live with Iran's regime and its proxies, which is why you saw it, carry out an action against Hezbollah that was, basically decapitated Hezbollah. It's obviously degraded Hamas's powers, and now it's realized that it can't sort of live side by side or very close to Iran's regime, because as long as Iran's regime is in existence, it will continue to try to kill Israelis. So that door has been opened. I think several possibilities exist. There could potentially be a coup. There could be a popular uprising. This regime could fall in any number of ways. So that's definitely a possibility on the horizon.
There was reporting earlier that Trump nixed an Israeli plan to kill the Ayatollah Khamenei. If that did happen, what would happen within the borders of that country?
Great question. Very, very hard to predict. So, under normal circumstances, if the supreme leader of Iran dies, what's supposed to happen is basically sort of political and clerical figures are supposed to come together and select a new leader. And talk is that it's supposed to be Khamenei's son. He's supposed to become the next supreme leader. But if he is killed, it really remains a mystery as to kind of what will happen. I suspect a very distinct possibility is that there may be the military forces, the IRGC, will surrender at that point, and we may enter regime change territory. There's obviously the other possibility of things occurring as they would have without the conflict, where his son sort of becomes the supreme leader and he decides to continue fighting. I think that's probably a very low probability.
Well, this is the thing. Are we getting ahead of ourselves here? Do we sense that there will be allies to Iran that will come forward and assist? I know there was a somewhat muted response from ally Russia a little while ago. Do you think anyone will be coming to their aid?
I don't think so. I think if we were going to see support from Russia or China, we would have seen it by now. As you mentioned, Russia gave an incredibly muted statement. It couldn't save Bashar al-Assad a few months ago. It's bogged down in its own military conflict. China, I don't think, has any appetite. I mean, China holds this regime up and supports it in a number of ways, but I don't think it wants to get militarily engaged. I think the Iranian regime's insurance policy had always been its proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. And two of those three are basically non-functional at the moment, and the Houthis are too far away and too small an organization to be able to help very much.
Two final questions here. One of them being you're a human rights lawyer. In terms of the human rights that are being broken in this conflict, how do you sense, that will be addressed in coming months, if at all?
Great question. I don't know how they will be addressed. I mean, I think the primary human rights violation that I'd be worried about are war crimes or indiscriminate bombings of civilian areas. Iran's regime is certainly engaged in that. It's lobbing missiles at Tel Aviv and other places into residential neighborhoods. Israel's government isn't doing that, and I'm deeply afraid that the war will go in that direction, and it will be a catastrophe. Regrettably, international human rights institutions are very weak, and these things are often not dealt with or not prosecuted in any meaningful way.
I think I saw you tweeting that, if Israel starts doing that, that's when they lose the support of some more Iranians. In the midst of all this, which is very weird, we could have ongoing talks around nuclear weaponry. Yeah. Are those just dead in the water, Kaveh? Like, it just seems crazy to have bombs in the air and then, discussing, the proliferation of nuclear bombs.
I don't think that's dead in the air. I actually think it's a distinct possibility that Iran will come back. I mean, Iran is already signaling that it wants Trump to step in and sort of call for a ceasefire. I think it's a distinct possibility that Iran comes back to the negotiating table. It sees that it cannot possibly fight Israel and win. There is no scenario in which that occurs. So it comes to the table and it basically, makes every concession that the United States wants. And it gives up its nuclear program. This is a point that I've repeatedly made in my writing, and I think it's worth stressing now. Iran's regime talks a big game, but it's actually a paper tiger. It cannot fight, and it's not interested in fighting. It's a regime that maybe 40 years ago was ideological. It is no longer ideological. It's not governed by any principle. It is basically a kleptocracy in Iran. Iran is a mafia state, and its regime is only interested in self-preservation. And if that means that they have to go to the negotiating table and give up their nuclear program, they will do that just so they can stay in power and continue to rob the country. Now, mind you, coming out of that negotiation, coming out of those concessions, I think the regime will be very weak.
This is the thing. How do you sell that failure to a country?
Exactly. I mean, there's already a very large percentage of the population that wants to overthrow this regime. There is a base that still protects it, but that base, I imagine, is going to be incredibly angry, seeing that they lost this war and had to, give everything away. And I suspect this regime will not be long for the world, either if it continues fighting or if it concedes. I think it's in a real bind, and I think its days are numbered.
All right, we will wait and see. That's lawyer and human rights activist Kaveh Shahrooz. Thank you so much for joining us today on Hub Hits.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. And ladies and gentlemen, if you like what you hear, if you like what you read, please consider signing up and becoming a free member on www.thehub.ca. Thanks.